One small drawing destroyed 12 years of trust in less than 10 seconds. Elowen wasn't searching for secrets. She was simply looking for Alistair's car charger before he left for another business trip. His leather briefcase sat open beside the dining table. She reached inside. Instead of the charger, her fingers touched a folded piece of paper covered in bright crayons. She smiled at first. Then she unfolded it. A little house stood beneath a bright yellow sun. 3 smiling figures held hands. One was a woman, 2 were children, and the tallest figure wore a blue tie that looked exactly like the one Alistair wore almost every day. At the bottom, written in uneven handwriting, were 6 words that made her heart stop. To Daddy, love you forever. Elowen stared at the drawing. Her smile disappeared. She turned the paper over. The crayon marks were fresh. The edges were clean. This wasn't something from years ago. A child had drawn it recently. Very recently. She tried to steady her breathing. Maybe there was a simple explanation. Maybe one of his coworkers had asked him to deliver it. Maybe it belonged to a client. Maybe. The front door opened. Alistair walked inside carrying grocery bags. He looked tired after another long day. Hey, he said with his usual warm smile. Then he noticed the drawing in her hands. His smile vanished. Only for a second, but Elowen saw it. He quickly crossed the room. Without saying a word, he gently took the drawing from her hands. I forgot this was in there. His voice sounded calm. Too calm. He folded it carefully and slipped it back into the briefcase. Elowen waited. She expected an explanation. None came. Instead, Alistair changed the subject. Did you remember we're having dinner with my parents this weekend? She answered automatically, but her thoughts never left the drawing. That night, she barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those 2 words. To Daddy. Not, Uncle. Not, Mr. Alistair. Daddy. By sunrise, Alistair was already dressed for work. He kissed her forehead like he always did. I'll be home late. She smiled. The same practiced smile she'd worn for years. Then she watched him drive away. This time, she didn't stay behind. Keeping several cars between them, Elowen quietly followed her husband through the morning traffic. For the first time in their marriage, she wasn't following the man she trusted. She was following the stranger she feared she had never truly known. Elowen kept several cars behind Alistair as he left the city. The familiar streets disappeared. Office buildings gave way to open fields. Soon, they crossed an old stone bridge over a quiet river. Alistair turned onto a narrow country road lined with tall oak trees. At the end of the road stood a modest white cottage surrounded by wildflowers and a weathered wooden fence. It looked peaceful, ordinary. Nothing about it suggested the secret that was about to unfold. Elowen parked far enough away that her car wouldn't be noticed. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it. She watched as Alistair stepped out of his car. Before he even reached the front gate, the cottage door burst open. 2 young children raced across the yard. Dad, Daddy. Their laughter echoed through the quiet countryside. Without hesitation, they threw themselves into Alistair's arms. He laughed. A genuine laugh. The kind Elowen hadn't heard from him in months. He lifted the younger child into the air while the older one clung tightly to his side. Elowen gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. She couldn't breathe. Her mind searched desperately for another explanation. Maybe they were mistaken. Maybe they called every adult Dad. But deep inside, she already knew they didn't. A moment later, the front door opened again. An elegant woman stepped outside. She looked to be around Elowen's age. She wore a simple green dress, her dark hair tied neatly behind her shoulders. There was nothing dramatic about her. Nothing that suggested she knew she was destroying another woman's world. She smiled warmly at Alistair. For a brief second, Elowen expected him to walk through the front door with everyone else. Instead, he quietly handed one of the children a small paper bag. Then he looked around carefully. His eyes scanned the road, the trees, the parked cars, almost as if he wanted to make sure nobody had followed him. Satisfied, he walked away from the front entrance. He disappeared behind the side of the house. A narrow stone path led toward a hidden side door that couldn't be seen from the road. He unlocked it with a key, and slipped inside without ever entering through the front. Elowen stared in disbelief. Why hide his arrival? Inside a house where everyone clearly expected him. She barely noticed the front door opening once more. The elegant woman walked around the side of the house. Seconds later, she wrapped both arms around Alistair in a long, familiar embrace. Elowen's entire world fell silent. Whatever this place was, whatever these people meant to him, it was far more than a simple visit. The hardest part wasn't what Elowen had seen. It was pretending she hadn't seen any of it. She returned home before Alistair that afternoon. When he walked through the front door, he greeted her with his usual smile. He kissed her forehead, asked about her day, even offered to cook dinner. For a brief moment, she almost believed the man she married was still standing in front of her. Then she remembered the children's voices. Dad. Every word he spoke suddenly felt rehearsed. Every smile looked borrowed. Every act of kindness felt like another layer covering a secret. Elowen knew one thing. If she confronted him now, he would deny everything. She needed proof. The following morning, after Alistair left for work, she quietly unlocked the home office. She had never searched through his things before. Trust had always been enough. Now trust was gone. Inside a filing cabinet sat years of neatly organized financial records. At first, everything looked normal. Mortgage payments, insurance, taxes. Then she noticed a folder with no label. Inside were monthly bank transfers. The same amount, sent on the same date. Every single month. For nearly 12 years, the account name meant nothing to her. But the payments never stopped. Her hands began to shake. She searched deeper. A second folder contained receipts. School tuition, children's clothing, medical bills, birthday gifts, holiday expenses. None of the names belonged to anyone in their family. Yet Alistair had paid every invoice without missing a single one. Elowen leaned back in her chair. This wasn't one mistake. This wasn't one secret meeting. This was another life. Carefully planned. Carefully hidden. For years. She opened another envelope. Inside were birthday cards. Not written by Alistair, but addressed to him. Thank you for always being there. We love you. Each message felt like another crack spreading through her marriage. Her eyes filled with tears. How many birthdays had he celebrated with them, while telling her he was working late? How many anniversaries had he left early, because someone else was waiting? She almost closed the drawer. Almost. Something beneath the folders caught her attention. A faded photograph. Its edges had turned yellow with age. She slowly picked it up. The date printed in the corner stopped her breathing. It had been taken 3 years before she and Alistair were married. The picture showed a much younger Alistair standing beside the elegant woman from the cottage. Between them stood 2 smiling children. They looked like a family. Elowen stared at the photograph. Every answer she had uncovered only created one terrifying question. If this picture existed before their wedding, then had their entire marriage been built on a lie? Sometimes the answers you're desperate to hear are replaced by a single sentence that changes everything. Elowen couldn't stop staring at the old photograph. She looked at it again. And again. Every detail matched the woman she had seen outside the cottage. The same gentle smile. The same eyes. The same house. She could no longer live with questions. The following afternoon, after finishing work, Elowen drove back across the river. This time, she wasn't there to watch from a distance. She was there to knock on the front door. Her heart pounded as she walked through the small wooden gate. She raised her hand. Knock, knock, knock. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the door slowly opened. The elegant woman stood quietly in the doorway. She looked surprised, but not frightened, almost, as though she had been expecting this moment. Neither woman spoke at first. Elowen finally broke the silence. My name is Elowen. The woman nodded gently. I know. That answer caught her off guard. You know who I am? Yes. Elowen took a slow breath. I need you to tell me the truth. Who are you? And why do those children call my husband Dad? The woman lowered her eyes. For a moment, it seemed she might finally explain everything. Instead, she looked back at Elowen with sadness. Not guilt. Not anger. Sadness. I can't answer those questions. Elowen felt frustration rising. You owe me the truth. The woman quietly shook her head. No, I owe someone else a promise. The words landed harder than Elowen expected. A promise. To Alistair. Again, the woman shook her head. No. There was another long silence. Finally, she stepped slightly closer. Her voice became almost a whisper. If you truly want answers, ask him about the letter he refuses to open. Elowen frowned. What letter? The woman's expression didn't change. He knows exactly which one. Before Elowen could ask another question, the woman slowly stepped back inside. The door closed. Softly. Without another word, Elowen stood frozen on the porch. The afternoon breeze moved through the trees. Everything around her felt strangely still. She had come searching for one truth. Instead, she had left carrying an even greater mystery. There was no explanation, no confession, no denial, only one sentence repeating over and over inside her mind. The letter he refuses to open. As she walked back toward her car, Elowen realized something that frightened her even more than the hidden family. Whatever that letter contained, someone had been protecting its secret for years. The words followed Elowen all the way home. Ask him about the letter he refuses to open. She replayed them over and over. A letter. Not letters. Just one. If it mattered enough for a stranger to mention it, it had to matter even more to Alistair. The next morning, after he left for work, Elowen stood outside his study. She hesitated. Then she slowly turned the handle. The room looked exactly as he had left it. Every book was perfectly aligned. Every file sat neatly on the shelves. Nothing looked out of place. But now she knew appearances could lie. She searched every drawer, every cabinet. Nothing. Then her eyes settled on the old oak desk in the corner. It was the one piece of furniture Alistair never allowed anyone to touch. She pulled open the top drawer. Pens, notebooks, business cards. The second drawer held folders. The third wouldn't open. It was locked. Elowen stared at it. She remembered seeing Alistair keep a small brass key on his office keyring. He always left a spare set in the kitchen. Minutes later, she returned. Her hands trembled as she slid the tiny key into the lock. Click. The drawer opened. Inside sat a small wooden box. It looked old. The edges were worn smooth from years of handling. She carefully lifted the lid. Her breath caught. Inside were envelopes. Dozens of them, each one neatly tied together with faded blue ribbon. Every envelope carried the same elegant handwriting. Every envelope was still sealed. None had ever been opened. She picked up the oldest one. The date shocked her. It had been written almost 15 years earlier. Another. 12 years. Another. 9 years. The letters stretched across nearly every season of their marriage. Yet every single envelope carried the exact same sentence. When you're ready to know the truth. Elowen slowly sat down. Who had written them? Why hadn't Alistair opened even one? Had he been afraid? Or had he already known what they contained? She counted them. 1, 2, 3, 14. She looked at the faded numbers written lightly in the corner. The sequence stopped abruptly. Her heart skipped. There should have been another envelope. The ribbon had an empty space where one letter had clearly been removed. Someone had taken it. Not years ago. Recently. She searched the box again. Nothing. Only silence. Only unanswered questions. Elowen closed her eyes. For 15 years, Alistair had ignored every letter that promised the truth. But one letter, one single envelope, was missing. And somehow, she knew that missing letter was the key to everything. The day Alistair vanished without a word, Elowen thought she was finally about to uncover his second family. Instead, she found herself standing outside a funeral. That morning, Alistair's phone rang before sunrise. He answered quietly on the back porch. Elowen couldn't hear the conversation. She only noticed how the color drained from his face. When he came back inside, he didn't explain anything. I have to leave. Those were the only words he offered. No destination, no reason, no promise about when he would return. Within minutes, he was gone. Elowen waited an hour. Then she did what she had become ashamed of doing. She followed him. His car traveled far beyond the countryside cottage. This time, he stopped outside an old stone church surrounded by towering pine trees. The parking lot was already full. People dressed in black stepped quietly toward the entrance. A funeral. Elowen stayed back, hiding beneath the shade of a large oak tree. She expected Alistair to slip quietly inside. Instead, something unexpected happened. The moment he reached the church doors, several elderly people rushed toward him. One woman embraced him tightly. Another held both of his hands while crying. A middle-aged man placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Their faces weren't filled with surprise. They looked relieved, as if the person they had been waiting for had finally arrived. Inside the church, it became even stranger. People greeted Alistair with warmth. Some nodded respectfully, others hugged him like family. Not distant relatives, not old friends. Family. Elowen scanned the room. Nobody looked at her. Nobody recognized her. Nobody even seemed aware she existed. It was as though she had never been part of Alistair's life. She quietly slipped into the last pew. The service began. Stories were shared. Memories filled the room. Again and again, people mentioned Alistair. Not as a guest. Not as a family friend. But as someone deeply connected to the person who had died. Elowen felt completely lost. Who were these people? Why had Alistair never spoken about them? After the service ended, everyone slowly gathered outside beside the cemetery. The crowd surrounded Alistair. An elderly man with silver hair approached him slowly, leaning on a wooden cane. He looked at Alistair with tired eyes filled with affection. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he placed a trembling hand on Alistair's shoulder. "Your father would have been proud." Elowen froze. Father. Alistair had always told her his father died years before they met. So who was this man talking about? And why did everyone else seem to understand except her? The truth finally came out, but it answered only half of the questions. After the funeral, Alistair didn't drive home. He parked beside a quiet lake just outside the town. For several minutes, neither he nor Elowen spoke. The silence between them felt heavier than any argument they had ever had. Finally, Alistair looked out across the water. "I know you've been following me." Elowen didn't deny it. "I stopped believing your words a long time ago." He closed his eyes. "I don't blame you." His voice was calm, but tired. "As much as I wanted to protect everyone, I ended up hurting you the most." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an old photograph. It was the same young man Elowen had seen in the funeral slideshow. His name was Andre. "My best friend. We grew up together. He was like a brother to me." Alistair stared at the photograph before continuing. 15 years ago, Andre died in a car accident. The night before he died, he made me promise something. He asked me to look after his wife and his 2 children if anything ever happened to him. Elowen listened without interrupting. "I thought it would only be for a little while. But life became harder for them. So I kept helping. The school fees, the medical bills, the birthdays. I paid because I gave my word." His eyes filled with quiet regret. "I never told you because I thought people would misunderstand. I thought I could carry the burden alone." Elowen looked down. "So all those bank transfers were for them?" Alistair nodded. "Every single one." For the first time in days, part of the picture finally made sense. The funeral, the financial records, the people who treated him like family. Everything fits together. Almost. She looked back at him. "If that's true, why do the children call you Dad?" Alistair froze. His breathing became uneven. He looked away instead of answering. The confidence he had shown while explaining Andre's story disappeared. His hands tightened around the photograph. "There are some promises," he whispered. "That has become more complicated than anyone expects." Elowen felt her heart sink again. The explanation had answered many questions. But it had avoided the biggest one. She leaned forward. "What aren't you telling me?" Alistair opened his mouth, then stopped. His silence said more than any confession could. Whatever came next was the secret he feared most. And Elowen knew one thing with absolute certainty. Andre's promise wasn't the whole story. There was another truth, one Alistair still couldn't bring himself to speak aloud. After their conversation by the lake, Elowen couldn't shake the feeling that Alistair had stopped just short of the real truth. He had explained to Andre. He had explained the promise. But he still hadn't explained the hidden identity. Or why the children called him Dad. The next day, while searching through the documents she had already collected, one detail caught her attention. Several old legal papers didn't carry the name Alistair. They were signed under a completely different surname. At first, she thought it was a mistake. Then she found another, and another. The same first name. A different family name. For years. Confused, Elowen contacted the lawyer whose name appeared on one of the documents. She expected him to refuse to speak. Instead, after confirming her identity, he quietly said one sentence. "I always hoped you would find out." An hour later, they met in his office. The lawyer opened an old case file that had gathered dust for years. "Alistair never broke the law," he said calmly. "The court approved everything." Elowen frowned. Approved what? The change of surname. Her heart skipped. It wasn't permanent. It was protection. The lawyer leaned forward. After Andre died, his children became the legal heirs to a family estate worth millions. But other relatives wanted that inheritance. They threatened anyone standing between them and the children. Elowen listened without blinking. The safest solution was to hide the children's legal guardian. So Alistair temporarily used another surname. He became invisible to the people searching for him. Every new sentence rewrote the story in her mind. The hidden documents. The secret house. The careful financial support. None of it had been about building another life. It had been about keeping 2 children alive. Yet one question remained. If everything was legal, why hide it from me? The lawyer looked genuinely sad. That answer belongs to Alistair. As Elowen stepped outside, her phone vibrated. A courier stood beside her car holding a large brown envelope. "Mrs. Elowen." She nodded slowly. "This was redirected to you. There were instructions to deliver it only if it was returned unopened." Her eyes widened. The handwriting on the envelope was instantly familiar. Elegant. Careful. Exactly like the unopened letters inside the wooden box. Across the front were the same words. "When you're ready to know the truth." This envelope was different. Its seal had already been broken. Someone had opened it, then sent it back. Elowen stared at it. The missing letter had finally found its way home. One letter erased months of suspicion and replaced it with a truth Elowen never imagined. The broken seal stared back at her. For several long seconds, she couldn't bring herself to open the envelope. Her hands trembled. Her heartbeat echoed in the silence. Finally, she unfolded the yellowed pages inside. The handwriting matched every unopened letter she had found in Alistair's wooden box. The first line stopped her cold. "If you're reading this, it means I am no longer here." The letter wasn't written by Alistair. It was signed by Andre. Elowen took a slow breath and kept reading. Andre wrote about the accident he knew he might not survive. He wrote about his wife, his children, and the family fortune that had already started tearing relatives apart. Then came the words that changed everything. "Alistair, if anything happens to me, I need you to become what my children can no longer have." Tears blurred Elowen's vision. She continued reading. "Tell them to call you Dad until they're old enough to understand why. If anyone discovers who they really are, they will become targets before they become adults." The room fell completely silent. Every question she had carried for weeks suddenly had an answer. The drawings, the hugs, the hidden house, the secret name, the unopened letters. None of it had been about betrayal. It had been about protecting 2 innocent children from people who valued money more than family. Andre's final words were even harder to read. "You will lose friendships. You may even lose the woman you love. But if my children live long enough to choose their own future, every sacrifice will have been worth it." Elowen lowered the letter slowly. Tears rolled down her face. She thought about every moment she had doubted Alistair. Every accusation she had silently made. Every painful conclusion she had reached. She finally understood why he carried so much guilt. Not because he had lived a double life. Because he believed telling the truth might put everyone in danger. The envelope slipped gently onto the table. For the first time since finding the child's drawing, Elowen wasn't angry. She was heartbroken, not by lies, but by the impossible burden Alistair had carried alone for so many years. Then, a faint movement outside the living room window caught her attention. She looked up. A dark vehicle sat across the street. Its engine was running. Someone was inside, watching the house. And as the car slowly pulled away, Elowen realized one terrifying truth. The danger Andre had warned about might not be over after all. The real betrayal wasn't inside their marriage. It had been hunting them from the shadows all along. The black SUV disappeared before Elowen could read the license plate. She rushed outside, but the street was empty. Only the tire marks remained. For the first time, fear replaced confusion. Andre's letter had warned that powerful people wanted his children. Now someone was watching her home. She called Alistair immediately. His voice changed the moment she mentioned the vehicle. "Don't leave the house," he said. "I'm coming." Less than 30 minutes later, he arrived. He looked exhausted. Not because he had been caught. Because he knew this day might finally come. Elowen held up Andre's letter. "I believe you." The words hung in the air. Alistair closed his eyes. It was the first time in weeks he looked as though he could breathe. Then his expression hardened. "They've found us." He spread several old documents across the dining table. Family records, court papers, property agreements. Elowen studied them carefully. The inheritance everyone talked about wasn't simply money. It included voting control over a powerful family foundation that owned valuable land, businesses, and investments. Whoever controlled the children would eventually control everything. It was never just greed, Alistair said quietly. It was power. Andre had known it before he died. That's why he hid his children. That's why Alistair changed his name. That's why he accepted years of misunderstanding without defending himself. Every painful decision suddenly fits together. He hadn't betrayed Elowen. He had carried an impossible responsibility while trying to keep everyone alive. Elowen reached for his hand. "You should have trusted me." A faint smile crossed his face. "I wanted to. But every person who knew became another person who could be forced to talk." Silence filled the room. Not uncomfortable silence. The silence of two people finally standing on the same side. Then, a loud crash exploded from upstairs. Glass shattered. Both of them jumped to their feet. Another crash followed. Someone was inside the house. Alistair quickly pulled Elowen behind him. "Stay here." Heavy footsteps echoed across the second floor. A drawer slammed. Furniture scraped across the floor. Whoever had broken in wasn't searching randomly. They knew exactly what they wanted. The wooden box. The letters. Or perhaps, something even more dangerous. Alistair slowly reached for the fireplace poker beside the mantel. The footsteps suddenly stopped. The entire house became silent. Too silent. Then, a bedroom door creaked open upstairs. And someone began walking toward the staircase. The police arrived minutes after Alistair called for help. The intruder was gone. But the broken window, scattered papers, and overturned furniture told the same story. Someone had been searching for one thing. Evidence. After the officers left, the house felt strangely quiet. Elowen looked around at the damage. Just a week earlier, she believed Alistair had destroyed their marriage with lies. Now she saw something completely different. He had spent years protecting people he loved, even when it meant carrying the blame alone. Alistair sat down heavily. "There are things I never told you." Elowen pulled a chair beside him. "This time," she said softly, "tell me everything." For hours, he held nothing back. He explained how Andre's family had been threatened almost immediately after the funeral. How lawyers, investigators, and even private security had quietly helped hide the children's identities. How changing his surname wasn't enough. Every decision had required another sacrifice. Another secret. Another lie he never wanted to tell. "I thought if you knew," he admitted, "you'd become another target." Elowen reached for his hand. "You were trying to protect me." "I was. But I hurt you instead." Tears filled both their eyes. For the first time since the child's drawing appeared inside his briefcase. There were no more hidden answers. Only honesty. The following weeks changed everything. With Andre's letter, the legal documents, and years of evidence, authorities reopened the inheritance investigation. The people who had spent years using fear to control the family were finally exposed. Their influence collapsed. The threats stopped. The children no longer had to hide. One Saturday afternoon, Alistair and Elowen visited the countryside house together. This time, nobody watched from a distance. Nobody followed them. The front door opened before they knocked. The children ran outside laughing. Without hesitation, they hugged both of them. For the first time, there was no secret family. There was simply family. The children smiled at Elowen as if she had always belonged there. Later that evening, everyone gathered around the dinner table. The youngest child looked nervously at Alistair. Then at Elowen, "We have something to ask." The room became silent. The little girl took a deep breath. Her eyes filled with hope. "Can we," she smiled shyly, "keep calling you both Mom and Dad?" The answer would change all of their lives forever. 10 years passed. The fear was gone. The court cases were over. The people who had spent years chasing power had disappeared from their lives. But the people who chose love are still together. The old countryside house looked different now. Children's drawings had been replaced with university diplomas. The tiny kitchen where everyone once whispered in fear was now filled with laughter. Today, the family had gathered to celebrate another milestone. Andre's oldest son had just graduated from medical school. His younger sister had become a teacher. As everyone shared memories around the dinner table, the youngest reached into a wooden box. It was the same box that had once held years of unopened letters. She smiled gently. "I think it's time." The room grew quiet. She unfolded the final letter. Not the one that had uncovered the truth. The last one Andre had ever written. Her voice trembled as she began reading. "If you're hearing these words, then it means you survived. That is all I ever prayed for." She paused, wiping away tears. Then she continued, "Never measure family only by blood. Blood gives you a beginning. Love gives you a home." Everyone around the table was crying now. She looked at Alistair, then at Elowen. Her smile grew wider. "You kept every promise." She walked across the room. Without hesitation, she hugged them both. "You never replaced our father. You honored him." Alistair could barely speak. Elowen simply held the young woman tightly. Years ago, she thought one child's drawing meant her marriage had been built on lies. Now she understood. It had been built on sacrifice. On courage. On impossible choices made out of love. As the evening came to an end, family photos were taken beneath the old oak tree outside the house. There were no secrets left. No hidden identities. No fear. Only people who had chosen one another. Before everyone went inside, Andre's daughter quietly folded the final letter and placed it back inside the wooden box. "This belongs to all of us now." The camera slowly pulls back. The house glows warmly beneath the evening sky. Children laugh. Parents smile. The family Andre hoped would survive had become something even greater. Not because life has been easy, but because love had refused to give up. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. The deepest betrayal isn't always the secret someone keeps. Sometimes it's assuming you already know the whole story before you have the courage to read the final letter.